There are few things in this world more unnerving than the feeling of something watching you, something lurking just outside the reach of your senses. As gamers, we often immerse ourselves in fictional worlds, battling monsters, and facing down horrors that would make the bravest among us shudder. But what if those horrors weren't confined to the game? What if the evil we fought on screen bled into our reality? I never believed in ghosts, spirits, or any of that supernatural nonsense. To me, it was all make-believe, a way to scare kids into behaving or to sell tickets to the latest horror movie. But that was before the game. Before I found out the hard way that some things aren't just stories. Some things are real, and they are hungry for more than just attention. It all started innocently enough, as these things often do. I was a college student living off campus with two roommates, Jake and Emily. We were a tight-knit group, bonded by our shared love of gaming and our mutual disdain for the monotony of everyday life. We spent most of our free time huddled around the TV in our dingy little living room, battling each other in the latest multiplayer games or losing ourselves in whatever single-player titles had caught our interest that week. It was during one of these late-night sessions that we first heard about the game. Jake had been browsing through some obscure gaming forums when he stumbled across a post about it. The thread was vague, filled with cryptic messages and ominous warnings, but one thing was clear: this game was different. It wasn't something you could find in a store or download from a legitimate website. No, this game was only accessible through the dark corners of the internet, hidden away from prying eyes. Jake, being the curious type, was immediately intrigued. Emily and I, on the other hand, were more cautious. There was something about the whole thing that felt off. But Jake was persistent, and eventually, our curiosity got the better of us. After all, what's the harm in trying out a game, right? We spent the next few days digging through forums, piecing together bits of information and following leads until we finally found what we were looking for. The game was called The Final Hour, and it was unlike anything we had ever seen before. The download link was buried deep within a maze of encrypted sites, and even getting that far required a series of password-protected access points and shady deals with online contacts. But eventually, Jake managed to secure a copy of the game, and we were ready to see what all the fuss was about. The first thing that struck us was how old the game looked. The graphics were crude, reminiscent of something you'd see in the early 90s, and the sound design was equally archaic, with low-quality audio and simplistic music. But there was something unsettling about it, something that made our skin crawl from the moment we booted it up. The game started with a title screen that simply read The Final Hour in blood-red letters against a pitch-black background. There was no menu, no options, just a single command: begin. Jake, always the brave one, was the first to play. The game began with his character standing in what looked like an old, decrepit house. The walls were cracked and covered in mold, the windows boarded up, and the only light came from a flickering candle on a nearby table. The objective was simple: explore the house and find a way out. But as Jake moved his character through the dimly lit rooms, it became clear that this was no ordinary game. Strange things started happening almost immediately. The character's footsteps echoed unnaturally, the shadows seemed to move on their own, and there was a constant, low hum in the background that set our nerves on edge. But it wasn't until Jake opened a door and was greeted by a blood-curdling scream that we realized just how twisted this game was. The scream was unlike anything we'd ever heard before. It was a sound that seemed to come from the depths of hell itself, a mix of agony, fear, and pure, unadulterated evil. Jake jumped back, nearly dropping the controller, and for a moment, we all just sat there in stunned silence. But Jake, ever the thrill seeker, brushed it off and continued playing. The game grew more disturbing as he progressed. There were scenes of grotesque violence, eerie whispers that seemed to come from within the walls, and a sense of dread that only intensified the further he went. And then, just as Jake's character was about to open another door, the screen went black. For a moment, we thought the game had crashed. But then, a message appeared on the screen, written in the same blood-red letters as the title, "You Are Not Alone." From that point on, things started to get weird. The game became more than just a game. It was as if it were watching us, reacting to our movements, our thoughts, our fears. Jake tried to laugh it off, calling it a clever piece of programming, but I could see the unease in his eyes. Emily, who had been skeptical from the start, refused to play. She said there was something wrong with the game, something evil. Jake and I teased her at first, but deep down, I felt it too. There was something about the final hour that got under your skin, something that made it impossible to shake the feeling that you were being watched. The more we played, the worse it got. The game started glitching, displaying distorted images and random bursts of static that seemed almost intentional. The characters in the game would suddenly stop and stare at the screen, their eyes following our every move. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and the feeling of being watched became unbearable. It began with Jake. He woke up screaming in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat and babbling about the game. He said he'd seen the character from the game standing at the foot of his bed, its eyes glowing in the darkness. Emily and I tried to calm him down, telling him it was just a bad dream, but the fear in his eyes was real. And it wasn't long before the nightmares spread to us. I started seeing things in the shadows, hearing whispers that I couldn't quite make out. Emily became withdrawn, barely speaking and constantly looking over her shoulder. We all became paranoid, convinced that something was in the house with us, something that had followed us out of the game. But it was more than just paranoia. Things started happening. Strange things. Objects would move on their own, doors would open and close by themselves, and there were cold spots in the house that made our skin crawl. We tried to blame it on faulty wiring or drafts, but deep down, we knew the truth. The game had opened a door, and something had come through. The worst part was the feeling of being watched. It was always there, no matter where we were or what we were doing. It was like a presence that hovered just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to strike. The tension in the house was unbearable, and it wasn't long before we started turning on each other. Jake became obsessed with the game, convinced that if he could just beat it, everything would go back to normal. He played for hours on end, his eyes bloodshot and his hands shaking. Emily and I tried to stop him, but he wouldn't listen. He was convinced that the game was the key to ending whatever was happening to us. One night, as Jake was playing, the power went out. The entire house was plunged into darkness, and for a moment, all we could hear was the sound of our own breathing. Then, from somewhere in the house, we heard a whisper. It was soft, almost gentle, but it sent a chill down my spine. We grabbed flashlights and went to check the breaker, but when we got there, we found the box wide open, the switch flipped off. None of us had touched it. We flipped the switch back on, but the lights flickered and dimmed, barely illuminating the room. Jake was the first to notice the writing on the wall. It was faint, barely visible in the dim light, but it was there. Scrawled across the wall in what looked like blood were the words, "Play with us." Emily let out a small scream and backed away, but Jake just stared at the words, a look of grim determination on his face. He turned to us and said, "I'm going to finish this." From that moment on, things went from bad to worse. Jake became completely consumed by the game, playing it non-stop and ignoring everything else. He stopped eating, stopped sleeping, and the dark circles under his eyes grew deeper with each passing day. Emily and I were at our wits' end, but nothing we said or did seemed to reach him. And then, one night, Jake vanished. We searched the entire house, but there was no sign of him. His phone was on the floor in front of the TV, the game still paused on the screen. The front door was locked from the inside, and there were no signs of a struggle. It was as if he had simply disappeared. The police were called, but they found nothing. No fingerprints, no evidence, nothing. It was as if Jake had been erased from existence. Emily and I were left alone in that house, terrified and desperate for answers. But the game wasn't done with us. In the days that followed, Emily and I became prisoners in our own home. We could feel the presence in every room, watching us, waiting. The whispers grew louder, more persistent, and the shadows seemed to come alive, twisting and writhing in the corners of our vision. One night, I was woken by a cold breeze. I opened my eyes to see the bedroom door slowly creaking open. My heart raced as I grabbed the nearest object, a baseball bat I kept by the bed, and slowly got up. The house was deathly quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your ears ring. I made my way to the living room, and that's when I saw it. The TV was on, the game unpaused. But it wasn't Jake's character on the screen anymore. It was mine. I froze, the bat slipping from my fingers as I watched in horror. The character moved on its own, walking through the darkened halls of the house in the game, halls that now bore an eerie resemblance to our own. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, and I could hear my name being called over and over again. I tried to turn off the TV, to pull the plug, but nothing worked. The character on the screen kept moving, kept walking deeper into the house. And then it stopped, standing in front of a door. My breath caught in my throat as I recognized it. It was my bedroom door. The character reached out, its hand resting on the doorknob. I could feel my own hand moving, mirroring the character's actions. I tried to stop, to pull away, but it was like my body wasn't my own anymore. I watched in terror as the door slowly creaked open, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. And then I saw it. A figure, standing in the shadows, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. It was the same figure Jake had described in his nightmare, the same figure I had seen lurking in the corners of my vision. It stepped forward, its face twisted into a grotesque smile, and I felt my heart stop. The screen went black, and the house was plunged into darkness. I don't remember what happened next. I must have blacked out, because the next thing I knew, it was morning. The sun was shining through the windows, and everything seemed normal. Except for the fact that Emily was gone. I searched the entire house, but there was no sign of her. Her phone, her keys, everything was still there, but she was gone. Just like Jake. I called the police, but they were no help. To them, it was just another missing person case, no different from Jake's. But I knew the truth. The game had taken them, and it was only a matter of time before it came for me too. I tried to leave, to run, but every time I got close to the door, the whispers would start again, louder and more insistent. It was like the house itself was alive, trapping me within its walls, feeding off my fear. Days turned into weeks, and I stopped trying to escape. I stopped sleeping, stopped eating, just like Jake. I spent all my time in front of the TV, staring at the black screen, waiting for it to come back on. And then, one night, it did. The game was back, the same blood-red letters against the black screen. But this time, there was a new message. It's your turn. I didn't resist. I picked up the controller, my hands trembling, and pressed begin. The game started, and I found myself back in that old, decrepit house, just like before. But this time, I knew what was coming. I knew what I had to do. The character moved on its own, walking through the darkened halls, the whispers growing louder with each step. I could feel the presence behind me, getting closer and closer. But I didn't turn around. I kept walking deeper and deeper into the house until I reached the door. My bedroom door. I reached out, my hand resting on the doorknob, just like before. But this time, I didn't hesitate. I turned the knob and pushed the door open. And that's when I saw it. The screen went black and the game was over. But the nightmare was just beginning. And now I sit here in the darkness, waiting. The whispers are louder than ever, the presence closer than it's ever been. I know it's only a matter of time before it comes for me, before I'm taken, just like Jake and Emily. But I won't go without a fight. I won't let it win. I'm writing this down as a warning, a plea for anyone who finds this to stay away. Don't play the game. Don't let it into your life. Because once it's in, there's no getting it out. I don't know how much time I have left. The whispers are deafening now, and I can feel the cold breath on the back of my neck. But I won't give in. Not yet. The game isn't over. Not for me. And maybe, just maybe, if you're reading this, it's not over for you either. I can hear it now, the footsteps coming closer. The door is creaking open, and I know what's waiting for me on the other side. But I won't look. I won't give it the satisfaction. Because in the end, it's not the game that's haunted. It's us. And it always will be. The descent into madness I never thought I'd live to see this day, or at least, I didn't think I'd be sane enough to write about it if I did. The days that followed after Emily's disappearance blurred together like a smudge on the canvas of my life. Reality and nightmare became indistinguishable. Every creak in the house, every flicker of the lights, made my heart pound in my chest like a frantic drumbeat. The game, the final hour, had taken everything from me, and I was losing my grip on the last shreds of sanity I had left. I stopped eating. The thought of food repulsed me. Sleep was an impossibility. Every time I closed my eyes, I could feel it, the presence, watching me, its cold breath on the back of my neck, waiting for me to let my guard down. When I did manage to drift off, even for a few minutes, I was haunted by visions of Jake, of Emily, their faces contorted in terror as they were swallowed by the darkness. It got worse with each passing night. I'd wake up to the sound of whispers, indistinguishable at first, but growing louder, more distinct. They called my name, beckoning me to come closer, to join them. I'd see shadows out of the corner of my eye, flitting just beyond my field of vision. And always, there was the game, waiting for me in the living room, its screen dark and foreboding, the controller lying in front of it like a cursed artifact. I knew I should leave, get out of that house while I still could. But something kept me there, something stronger than fear. Curiosity? Guilt? Desperation? I couldn't tell anymore. All I knew was that I couldn't leave until I understood what was happening, until I found out what had taken Jake and Emily, and what was coming for me. The first encounter, it happened on a night like any other. I was sitting in the living room, staring at the blank screen of the TV, my mind a jumble of fragmented thoughts and memories. The room was dark, save for the faint glow of the streetlights outside, casting long, eerie shadows across the floor. The silence was oppressive, the kind that made your ears ring and your skin crawl. And then it happened. The screen flickered to life, unbidden, casting the room in a sickly, pale light. I jumped to my feet, my heart hammering in my chest as I stared at the screen. It was the game, the final hour, but something was different. The title screen was gone, replaced by a single image. It was the front door of the house. My house. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized what I was looking at. The image on the screen was live, like a security camera feed, showing the front door from the inside. The door was closed, but I could see something moving just outside the frame, something shifting in the shadows. And then the door began to creak open. My breath caught in my throat as the door slowly swung open, revealing the darkness beyond. For a moment, nothing happened. And then a figure stepped into the frame. It was Emily. She looked exactly as she had the night she disappeared, her hair disheveled, her eyes wide with fear. She was wearing the same clothes, the same expression of terror frozen on her face. But there was something wrong, something off about her. She didn't move like Emily. She didn't breathe like Emily. She just stood there, staring at me through the screen, her eyes empty, soulless. And then she spoke. "Help me." Her voice was a whisper, barely audible over the crackling static of the screen. But it was her voice, unmistakably. My heart wrenched in my chest as I watched her, torn between the overwhelming urge to run and the desperate need to help her. "Please, help me." Her voice cracked, and I could see tears welling up in her eyes, rolling down her pale cheeks. I took a step forward, my hand reaching out toward the screen as if I could somehow pull her out, save her from whatever nightmare she was trapped in. But as I got closer, the screen flickered again, and Emily's image distorted, her face twisting into something monstrous, something not human. The voice that came from her lips wasn't her own. It was deep, guttural, filled with malice. "You're too late." The screen went black. The haunting escalates after that night. Things escalated quickly. The house became a living nightmare. It started with the whispers, growing louder, more insistent, until they filled every corner of the house. They spoke in tongues I couldn't understand, but the malice in their tone was unmistakable. The shadows, once fleeting, became more solid, more present. They moved on their own, creeping along the walls, slithering under doors, like living things. I could feel them watching me, their cold, lifeless eyes boring into my back whenever I turned away. And then there were the apparitions. I'd catch glimpses of them out of the corner of my figures standing in the hallway, staring at me from the top of the stairs, their faces obscured by darkness. At first, I thought they were my imagination, tricks of the light. But they became more frequent, more real. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to find one standing at the foot of my bed, its face mere inches from mine. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, paralyzed by fear as it watched me with those hollow, empty eyes. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it would vanish, leaving me trembling and drenched in sweat. I tried everything to get rid of them, prayers, rituals, even contacting a priest. But nothing worked. The house was cursed, and it had its claws sunk deep into me. I could feel it, like a dark cloud hanging over my head, growing heavier with each passing day. But I couldn't leave. Every time I tried, the house would stop me. The doors would lock themselves, the windows would refuse to open, and the whispers would grow deafening, driving me back inside. I was trapped, a prisoner in my own home, and there was no way out. The descent into madness days turned into weeks, and I lost all sense of time. The outside world became a distant memory, something that belonged to another life, another person. My world was confined to the walls of that house and the horrors that lurked within. I stopped sleeping, terrified of what I might see if I closed my eyes. The shadows became my constant companions, whispering secrets in my ear, filling my mind with dark, twisted thoughts. I could feel myself slipping, my sanity unraveling, thread by thread. I started talking to myself, trying to drown out the whispers, to hold on to some semblance of reality. But it was no use. The line between reality and nightmare had blurred beyond recognition, and I was losing the battle. The game became my only focus, my only hope. I was convinced that if I could just finish it, I could end this madness, break the curse that had taken over my life. But every time I tried to play, the game would change, the rules shifting, the objective becoming more elusive. The house in the game had become a mirror of my own, the rooms identical, down to the smallest detail. But it was twisted, distorted, filled with horrors that defied explanation. The walls would bleed, the floors would groan under the weight of unseen things, and the whispers would follow me wherever I went. I became obsessed, spending hours in front of the screen, trying to decipher the clues, to find a way out. But the more I played, the deeper I sank into the darkness, until I could no longer tell where the game ended and reality began. The revelation it was during one of these marathon sessions that I discovered something that changed everything. I was exploring one of the rooms in the game, a room that was a perfect replica of my own bedroom, when I noticed something strange. There was a photo on the nightstand, a photo that hadn't been there before. I picked it up, my heart racing as I recognized the faces in the picture. It was a photo of me, Jake, and Emily. But there was something wrong with it. The colors were faded, the edges worn and frayed, as if the photo had been taken years ago. And our faces were twisted, distorted, like they had been melted by some unseen force. But that wasn't the worst part. In the background, barely visible, was another figure, standing in the shadows, watching us. Its face was obscured, but I could see the outline of its body, tall and thin, with long, spindly fingers that seemed to reach out toward us. My blood ran cold as I realized what I was looking at. The figure in the photo, it was the same figure that had been haunting me, the same figure that had taken Jake and Emily. I dropped the photo, my hands shaking, and backed away from the screen. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, as if they knew what I had seen. I could feel the presence behind me, its cold breath on the back of my neck, and I knew, without a doubt, that it was real. The game wasn't just a game. It was a doorway, a portal to another world, another reality. And I had opened it, unwittingly, when I started playing. The final confrontation, I don't know what possessed me to do it. Maybe it was desperation, or maybe I had finally lost my mind. But I knew I had to confront it, to face whatever it was that had taken over my life. I grabbed the controller, my hands trembling, and started the game again. The title screen flickered to life, the blood-red letters glowing ominously against the black background. But this time, there was no begin option. Instead, there was a single word, come. I hesitated for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest, before pressing the button. The screen went black, and then, slowly, the image of the house appeared, the front door creaking open as if inviting me inside. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, the controller clutched tightly in my hands. The house was dark, the only light coming from the flickering candles scattered throughout the rooms. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and I could hear the sound of something dripping, echoing through the empty halls. The whispers were louder now, almost deafening, and I could feel the presence getting closer, its icy fingers brushing against my skin. but I kept moving, one foot in front of the other, my eyes locked on the screen. I knew where I was going. I could feel it, like a magnet pulling me toward the heart of the house, to the source of the evil that had taken over my life. The door to the basement loomed ahead, its wood splintered and rotting. I reached out with trembling hands and pushed it open, the hinges groaning in protest. The stairs creaked under my weight as I descended into the darkness, the air growing colder with each step. At the bottom of the stairs, the door to the basement was open, revealing a room bathed in a sickly, greenish light. I stepped inside, my heart pounding in my ears, and froze. There, in the center of the room, was a figure, hunched over and shrouded in darkness. Its back was to me, but I could see its long, spindly fingers reaching out toward something that glowed faintly in the dim light. It was the game. The figure was holding the controller, its bony fingers wrapped around it, moving with unnatural speed as it played. The screen flickered with images of the house, the same house I was standing in, the same rooms, the same horrors. And then, slowly, the figure turned. Its face was a twisted mockery of humanity, its skin stretched tight over its skull, its eyes hollow and empty, filled with an endless void. It smiled at me, a grotesque, lipless grin that sent a wave of terror crashing over me. "Welcome," it rasped, its voice like nails on a chalkboard. "I've been waiting for you." I couldn't move, couldn't speak, as it stepped closer, its eyes locked on mine. The whispers grew louder, filling my mind with a cacophony of voices, each one more malevolent than the last. "You've played the game," it hissed, "and now you're mine." It reached out, its fingers brushing against my cheek, and I felt a coldness like I'd never known before, a coldness that seeped into my bones, into my soul. But then, something changed. A spark, a glimmer of light, flickered in the darkness, and I felt a surge of warmth, of strength, deep within me. It was faint, barely noticeable, but it was there, a tiny ember of hope in the sea of despair. I didn't know where it came from, or what it meant, but I clung to it, focusing all my will, all my strength, on that tiny spark. The figure recoiled, its eyes narrowing in anger, and I could see it now, the fear behind the malice, the desperation behind the facade. "You cannot win," it snarled, but its voice wavered, uncertain. I took a step forward, the warmth growing stronger, brighter, pushing back the darkness, the whispers. The figure shrieked, its form flickering, wavering as the light spread, filling the room, filling my mind. "I am not yours," I whispered, my voice growing stronger with each word. "You have no power over me." The figure let out a scream, a sound that tore through the air, shaking the very foundation of the house. The screen on the TV exploded in a shower of sparks, the image of the house flickering and dying as the figure dissolved into the air, its form disintegrating into nothingness. And then, just like that, it was over. The aftermath, the house was silent, the air still and heavy, but the presence was gone. The whispers, the shadows, the coldness, they were all gone, leaving only an eerie silence in their wake. I stumbled out of the basement, my legs trembling, my mind reeling from what had just happened. The house felt different, lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted from it. The air was clearer, the darkness less oppressive. But the damage had been done. I was alone. Jake and Emily were gone, taken by the darkness, their fates sealed by the curse of the game. I had survived, but at what cost? I left the house that night, leaving everything behind, my possessions, my memories, my life. I couldn't stay there, not after what had happened. The house was cursed, tainted by the evil that had taken root there, and I wanted no part of it. I drove for hours, not knowing where I was going, just needing to get as far away as possible. I eventually found myself in a small, quiet town, far from the city, far from everything I had known. I rented a small apartment, a place where I could try to rebuild my life, to forget what had happened. But the memories haunted me, the images of that night playing over and over in my mind. I tried to tell myself it was over, that I was safe, but deep down, I knew the truth. The game was still out there, waiting, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. And I knew, someday, it would come for me again. But until then, I would live, I would fight, and I would remember. Because I had faced the darkness and survived. And that was something the game could never take away from me. The end, for now, but as I sit here, writing this, I can't shake the feeling that it's not truly over. The darkness is still there, lurking just beyond the edges of my vision, waiting for the right moment to strike. I can feel its presence, faint but growing stronger with each passing day. I don't know how long I have, how long I can hold it at bay. But I know one thing for certain, I won't go down without a fight. The game may have taken Jake and Emily, it may have cursed my life, but it hasn't won. Not yet. I'll keep fighting, keep pushing back the darkness for as long as I can. Because in the end, that's all we can do. Fight. Survive. And hope that, one day, the nightmare will finally end. But until then, I'll keep playing. Because the game isn't over. Not by a long shot. And neither am I.